Good evening, folks. I'm Al Huey, along with my partner here, Robert Eierman. Welcome to Ridgecrest Talk. I believe this is going to be the Thursday night edition.
Okay.
Never know these days, though. Uh, it's good to be here and have you with us this evening. If I hadn't said it last couple of weeks, Happy New Year. We always appreciate your guys' input, so let us know the pros and cons, what you'd like to hear, and we'll try to make that happen. Obviously, the topic number one around here for the longest time has been water,
Yes.
but that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. Our special guest tonight is Mr. Mike Neal. Thanks for being with us, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
And Mike's what you might call a community activist, concerned citizen might be a better description.
In this case, yes.
Yeah. And we're going to be talking about one of our other local citizens, Mr. William Dale Howard. You may recall last election cycle he was amongst the group of candidates running for city council. Mr. Howard did not get elected, but above and beyond that, Mr. Howard has had an ongoing situation with the city regarding his properties. That's plural.
Yes. Many
Several.
times plural.
Yes. I believe the number of properties we're talking about was 17, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, actually, technically, there are 12 properties in this particular situation.
Okay, but at one time there were 17, and then it got reduced and reduced again. And so Mr. Howard's been involved with the city on this ongoing for, gosh, when
Since
you and I checked into it, it initially started in the 70s sometime.
Yes, absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it had to do with nuisance code violations on the property where he had items on the property that violated the code.
Yes.
He had fences. He used sea containers to
Yeah,
surround one of the.
we should
Well, there
make-
was more than one property, but several properties.
Maybe back up just a little bit. There was a whole bunch of items that people might call cluttered junk that were on his properties. And with time, and we'll explain the reason later, or part of the reason, it got surrounded by fencing and by sea containers.
Which the city did initially approve.
That was part of a
They did.
negotiated settlement with the city. That is correct.
And then the city later came back and said, you know what, we can't do that. Now, we don't know
Yep.
for sure if somebody in the city negotiated this deal with Mr. Howard, said, yeah, if you put up the sea containers so people can't see the property, that'll be good.
It was, to the best of my knowledge, and from when we sat down there at the police station and reviewed it all, it was conducted by Code Enforcement Officer Bob Smith, and went through the one of the committees for the council. I don't remember offhand which one, but and it was approved, and I don't remember if it was submitted to the council or if it was just something that was handled only at the committee level. But it was a negotiated deal between Mr. Howard and the city.
And nevertheless, he moved forward with that, went out
Yes.
and purchased a bunch of sea containers.
Yes.
And then later the city came back and said, you know, you can't do that.
Right. And I think the
And
worst...
he got a little upset,
Yes, because one of the worst aspects of that
rightfully so.
negotiation was at the time, and you correct me if I misspeak here, because you know the situation far better than I. He was about to buy property in the county, which
That's
is
right,
which is
that's
only
right.
2 blocks away from his other properties, and that was one alternative. The other alternative that came up was the negotiated settlement with the city that he could, as long as he surrounded the property so that all of these things, possessions, weren't visible from the street, it would be okay.
Right.
So I think that the cost would have been about the same, buying the property or buying all the C-vans, putting up the fencing, etc. And he, let's just put it this way, put his faith in the negotiations with the city and went ahead with that plan.
Yes.
So, real quick, again, before we get to you, is there were various lawsuits. One of them was a nuisance lawsuit, which Mr. Howard did end up in court with a jury, and he was cleared, not found guilty, acquitted of all the nuisance charges. But that didn't stop the other legal action. And let's kind of let
Yes.
you take a little bit and give your background story to all this. Are we pretty much on track here?
Pretty much, well, except we haven't mentioned the ongoing suit, which is the civil suit, which was filed, I believe, exactly at the same time as the original charges, which I believe they varied the charges. I mean, the first set of actual, what I would call lawful charges against him started, and this all started in like 2012, and they brought 37 something kind of trumped up charges against him. Couldn't produce on that particular one. The judge said, well, you don't even have sufficient evidence, but of course in Kern County for certain, they just said, well, instead of you can't bring enough evidence to prosecute, for never mind, well, you can come back later and redo it. So they came back later and brought it was 13 charges, one that they ended up having to just completely drop, and so they were trying to get him on some kind of a misdemeanor, and these
Related
were really
to what? The
just to the property. So the suit that he won in court were all public nuisance charges.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they just I was there for all the jury selection, all the trial, and it was you could just sit there and laugh if they had let you in the courtroom. It was ridiculous, the evidence they tried to bring forth, and use up our tax money to
Okay.
prosecute
Unfortunately,
him
we
on.
got to take our first break here, so keep
Okay.
mind of where you are. We'll take our break to pay the bills here, and we'll be back on the other side. Don't go away.
And welcome back to Ridgecrest Talk. I'm Robert Eierman, along with co-host Al Huey. And this evening we have a special guest, Mr. Mike Neal, community activist, concerned citizen. Yes. And we're talking about the Dale Howard situation.
Right, with the property issue.
Yep.
And you were
So-
saying before we went to break,
Okay, so
they got it down to 12 charges.
It had 12 charges of creating a public nuisance, and that was completely tied to, well, he has all this stuff on the property that violate zoning ordinances, and he has peacocks that make noise and supposedly harass people. So they went through the whole 4 days worth in court. Like I said, and oh, by the way, prior to the beginning of the trial, they had to have their conference in chambers, and Mr. Howard told me after this was all over that the public defender was informed that he could not present as evidence for the defense that Bob Smith had signed an affidavit saying that he had told Mr. Howard he could have the C-vans on the property, and neither could they discuss anything about his property rights. So they immediately removed the two primary legs of their defense that they were planning on using, and then proceeded with the trial. But of course, the prosecutor's case was so ridiculous. It really was absolutely ridiculous. If I was his boss, I think I would have had to relieve him of his job after that trial. All they talked about was how he violated zoning laws. And then they showed some videos of the peacocks walking down the street on one occasion, and didn't even go past the southern boundaries of the properties that Mr. Howard owned. I mean, they were on the street. But they were also kind of being herded by this person going at them with the video camera, you know, and they don't want you to get up to them. So anyway, they managed to get a semi-intelligent jury because they saw through all of this, and took them, I don't know, a little while, and then came back, and he was exonerated of 11 other charges, and they were hung on the one charge, and it was all specifically related to each piece of property. So probably it was, you know, his house, and he had the peacocks, and somebody thought maybe he did actually create a public nuisance with the peacocks, but they couldn't get all 12 to agree on that, so that was it. So he was done. So, you know, he actually had a trial. He got to have a trial before a jury of his peers. They tried to rig it beforehand, as they usually do around here, but, you know, they couldn't even come up with witnesses to say that he even created a real public nuisance. So he won that. Well, that was like after 2 years of being in court with them on these, you know, those charges or related charges.
Say here, you said it was 2 years. It was crazy because they'd schedule a court date, and then
I'd have a hearing.
The defense would, or the prosecutor would have to delay, want to extend it out. And that was causing Mr. Howard to have to spend money to have an attorney and prepare.
Yes.
And so this went on for 2 years, delay after delay after delay, money out of his pocket, time after time after time. I just wanted to, okay.
At the same time, they filed the civil suit against him, and so that's ongoing, and that has to be heard in Bakersfield. So he's driving back and forth to Bakersfield, employing a lawyer all this time, spending lots of money. He spent over $300,000 of his own money trying to defend himself on these charges. And so now the problem is that the civil suit, apparently you don't get a jury trial. Now, this seems kind of weird to me for a government entity to file a civil suit, but it doesn't have to be lawful anymore. We're basically not a nation of law anymore, but you know, that's what they did, and that's what they've gotten away with. And he had no witnesses there in the hearings. All they had were the affidavits of the whiny people who wanted to complain about his property, and anybody else the police could drum up, and affidavits, prosecuting attorney, Mr. Howard and his attorney, and the judge. And there you are. You know, that's a no-win situation anytime you go in something like that. And so eventually, after 2 years, after hundreds of thousands of dollars, the judge said, okay, we're going to put this property in receivership, and you got to clean it up. So that was instituted about a year. Well, actually, the action actually started last April. The receiver lawyer guy finally shows up down there on Mayo Street and talks to Mr. Howard, says, you know, we're going to start taking action. And
did they give him an opportunity to clean the property up?
Well, he knew beforehand, and so he had gotten really busy and started taking stuff off the property. I went down there one day, spent a day helping him. I don't think a few other people did, but very, very little. But he managed to get most of the stuff, all the C-vans, most of the other metals, things like that, off of the properties. So then they show up with their highly overpaid contractor and decide that there was another house on another lot that had been partially burned. They wouldn't allow them to rebuild the structure, even though it was well within the legal bounds, you know, of this isn't so damaged that you have to tear it down, because they drummed up this bogus stuff about it having asbestos in it. And
well, even so, there is asbestos abatement, and there are ways to handle that.
Yeah, but it had to be torn down. Now, mind you that the first conversation that they had face to face, that I was there with the camera, and they talked about some other things that they were saying had to be done, and Mr. Howard was saying, well, you know, that's not in the city code, and the guy said, well, basically, I don't care, and so Mr. Howard asked him, so the law really doesn't matter here, and he says, no, it doesn't. So here's the thing: if you ever get trapped into having a lien put on your property for whatever reason they want you to do something, or for God forbid your property put in for receivership, the receiver is king. It doesn't matter whatsoever what law says anymore. You're going to do what they say you're going to do, and you're going to pay everything that they claim that it costs to make that happen.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
we got to take another break.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll talk more about this. I'm particularly interested in finding out the opportunity that he had to abate the property. So join us on the other side. We'll be back with more.
And welcome back to our final segment here on Ridgecrest Talk. I'm Robert Eierman, along with co-host Al Huey. And again, this evening we're talking with Mike Neal, concerned citizen over the Dale Howard situation. And you had a question for him.
Yeah, if Mr. Howard was starting to do the abatement of his property, I don't understand why the system did not allow him to continue that process. Maybe even extend the time, because Mr. Howard is not a young man. He's in his 80s, right?
Yes, he is.
So I don't understand why they had to move so quickly with the receivership if, in fact, Mr. Howard was doing as they requested and cleaning up the property and moving it off there and starting to come in line with city ordinances.
You want my simple answer?
Yeah.
Power, control, money.
Well, if that's the case,
Exactly.
then if you're sitting on the council, you should be ashamed of yourself.
Absolutely.
The man was doing what he was asked to do. Evidently, for the city, it wasn't quick enough. But again, as we mentioned early on in the show, this started back in the 70s with the back and forth, the city agreeing to stuff and then changing their minds, saying, no, you can't do that, after the man spent hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is shameful. It's really shameful that now, I guess, what you're going to get to, Mr. Howard is going to end up losing the property. He will be
Yes, he is.
homeless. And with all the costs he's incurred through this whole process, pretty much penniless.
Well, if you believe the Daily Independent, I'd take my Farsight glasses off. An article from November 12th, okay? He'd already put up another $50,000 probably a year ago for some kind of a bond for I forget what, okay? So they went back to court and they said, well, you know, we're going to take this 50 and apply it to other charges. But that didn't have, you know, there's all kinds of charges here. Okay, in the November 12th article in Daily Independent, they quote that still up in the air in a ruling in 2015 is $315,000 in city fees. Now, these were the city's attorney's fees paid to this vampire lawyer firm, Jones and Meyer, that they've racked up. It goes past that. Okay, now you've got abatement cost, and before they get done, and this was pretty much predicted from the start, it'll be close to $100,000 in the abatement cost, and you know, like I say, this receiver group is basically a lawyer who gets the onus of the judge, and then they get cut loose. So they know how to make things cost a lot, okay? But this is this weird, convoluted situation where they get to control his property. They get to take out loans against his property, but he has to pay the loans, okay? He has no say at all in that process, or how much the loans are, how much the abatement costs are. If he wanted, anytime he wanted to contest anything the receiver wanted to do, they had to go have hearing before the judge, in which time the receiver is continuing to charge about $1,000 an hour for just going to the hearing, and that goes on top, so you can see why he wouldn't want to fight too hard. So the latest development, documented in an article through the Daily Independent, who's now they're actually talking to the receiver group. The guy who's prosecuting this on the receiver group's behalf is a guy named Andrew Adams of California Receivership Group. Okay, and it said he told them, it says, as for Howard, his house is still in danger of being foreclosed on. The lender who supposedly lent them money, and I think all it really did was the guy who actually did the abatement work, did something, maybe bought a certificate or whatever. He lent them the money. Of course, he trumped up the amounts because he's lending money, knows he's going to get it one way or the other. And the receiver's got to pay their worker back. I mean, does this sound right or what? But anyway. And then, of course, they found other things like taking down concrete block walls there that don't even have to have a permit or anything else. But, oh, no, they've got to come down because the law doesn't matter. Another $25,000 for that, so forth and so on. Mr. Howard's got to pay that. And he's saying, well, if Mr. Howard doesn't refinance, get the money, work out a deal with this guy who supposedly lent them the money, he won't be able to prevent foreclosure. And he was told they would actually start this in January. But it's probably going to drag out. But, here you got a bunch of blood-sucking entities who have the power of the court behind them, and they're able to just come in, stack up the charges, and then say, Mr. Howard, you going to pay it? Or do we have to take your house? Because that's the only thing that's really worth very much out there. The rest of the lots are just bare dirt now, to pay this off. And then, and there's still the city hasn't made one single statement, period. Are we going to say never mind about our attorney fees that $300,000+ or any of that? That still hangs out in the air, and there's been talk in the court, in the discussions in court, to make him, Mr. Howard, personally liable for those other costs that the city claims they've incurred, which would mean anything that he owns they could come after. Okay? Now, I have talked for a year and a half. I have talked and pleaded almost to the point of tears at the city podium in City Hall for them to put an end to this and say, we got the property cleaned up. The police chief said, all we want is the property cleaned up. It's cleaned up, but now the blood-sucking bloodbath is coming along, and nobody will do anything, period. They just won't stop it.
I find it that maybe the city is on good legal ground, although I, with you, agree that they shouldn't be, but they certainly are not on, in my opinion, moral ground. And I think that the fact that no member of the council has ever considered stopping this and stopping that black-hearted attorney firm from pushing this matter, as far as I'm concerned, they're guilty of elder abuse, and all 5 of them should be in prison for about 7 years. But the only thing I'd say to them is, may God have mercy on your soul for what you've allowed to happen with an immoral situation.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, that's going to do it for us for tonight. We'll try to keep you updated if we get more information on this, but it's a sorry situation.
Nobody wins.
No.
Oh, this is a black stain on Ridgecrest.
Absolutely
period.
true. Look out if you're next in line.
Yes.
Well, that's it for tonight, folks. Join us next week right here, Thursday nights, Ridgecrest Talk.